Good evening, explorers, and welcome to the zone.
Crikey mates, do I have a treat for you today. We have a BTR in its natural habitat. As you can see, it's taken a little swim in the river. Now, these things look really cool, but you have to be really careful as they are extremely dangerous. Mates, we have to be really careful right here. You can see we have an armored SWAT mimic. An extremely dangerous mimic in the zone. Well, I need to get a picture of this, mate. Where's my camera? 1 second. Where the hell? Alright, here she is.
Real quick before the video properly begins, a fellow content creator, Plenty of Nothing, just posted a video very similar to this one, but with more of a lore focus. It's really good, you should check it out. Where we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Pechorsk Exclusion Zone, and what lies within it. Today we're looking at the many hostile entities that an explorer may encounter on their incursions into these desolate wastes. Let's get into it. Before we look at the individual entities, we gotta talk about armored variants. There are armored variants of most entities with the exception of spawns, phantoms, and sliders. And technically the BTR, but it doesn't really matter with that. You can tell if an entity is armored by the orange, almost crystal-like exterior covering its body. This hard layer can stop your bullets with varying levels of effectiveness depending on what kind of ammo you're using and the range you're shooting from. As a general rule though, larger calibers and armor-piercing rounds will have a higher chance of penetration, while smaller calibers and cheaper rounds will have a much lower chance to penetrate. If you want more info on penetration values, then go ask your mom. Then check out my range series of videos. Just bear in mind that I didn't talk about range and velocity as a factor, which, as it turns out, depending on the round, can either make a huge difference or nearly none at all. For example, range doesn't seem to affect 7.62 by 54R penetration all that much, while 12 gauge slug penetration drops like a rock at range. I'll do a video explaining this further in the future, but just for now know that range can be a factor. Armored entities also typically have increased health and damage output, making them more dangerous in more ways than one. However, there is one advantage to fighting them over their unarmored counterparts. That is, they are extremely easy to spot, even in pitch black darkness. And in my opinion, the most dangerous entities are the ones you don't see until it's too late. No! Another thing we have to mention is that all entities besides the BTR and spawn have a weak spot, that when hit will deal 4 times damage to the entity. And with that out of the way, let's move on to the entities themselves. First up on our list of fatal fauna, we have the humble Fragment. It has a base health of 45 and deals 17 damage per melee swing. The armored variant has 200 health and deals 40 damage per swing. I am also lumping in the Phantom here, which has a base health of 60 and deals 15 damage per swing. These are found all over the zone and are likely the first entity the explorer will encounter. Unlike most other entities, the weak spot is their center mass, so headshots will provide no benefit. When spotted, it will slowly shamble towards the explorer and attack when in arm's reach. When killed, it will reveal an internal core, which must be destroyed. Otherwise, after 15 seconds, it will reform and begin attacking again. Phantoms differ in that they are more transparent and do not produce a core when killed. Overall, these guys are pretty much just cannon fodder and pose little threat to explorers. I highly recommend throwing knives to dispatch them, or even darts if you want to be more cost effective. This especially applies to the armored variant, as they can be bullet sponges otherwise. If you want more info on melee combat, I have a video going over it. Help save ammo for the more potent threats. Next, we have the Nimble Spawn. It has a base health of 30 and deals 13 damage per hit. Like the Fragment and Phantom, these can be found everywhere in the zone. However, they do not have a weak spot. When spotted, it will pursue its target at a high speed, and within 10 meters or closer, it will leap into the air to attack. If successful, it will bounce back into the air and begin its pursuit immediately after landing on the ground. If it misses, however, it will be stunned for a brief moment, leaving it open to attack. It is recommended to use knives or darts for ammo conservation. Again, see my melee combat video for more information on that. Fortunately, spawns make this loud droning noise that is audible from even rather long distances, making it unlikely that it will get the drop on you. Unless you're like me and associate it with background noise until the last second when it's flying Mach 3 at my face.
It's not too good.
Overall, these are just pests that pose little threat to explorers. As long as you are moving even slightly to the side when they jump, they almost always miss. Moving on, we have the Persistent Seeker. It has a base health of 90 and deals 6 damage per pseudo-Euclidean induction vector. I don't think I know what any of those words mean. It has a maximum attack speed of 2 attacks per second, giving it a potential DPS of 12. The armored variant has 160 health and deals 10 damage per attack or 20 damage per second. Seekers can be found in Balaki, Pobeda, Kolkaz, and Pechorsk Castle. The armored variant only being seen at and past Pobeda. When spotted, Seekers will begin sprinting towards you. It will begin its attack once reaching a very close range. One thing to note about Seekers is that their footsteps are inaudible until they are very close to you. This often results in unexpected jump scares. Due to their predictable movement, headshots are easy and always recommended. Attacking the head will also stun the Seeker for a brief moment. I personally recommend melee kills whenever it's convenient. Again, refer to my melee range video. Fun fact, knives can also block Seeker attacks if you just hold it up to their face. Overall, these guys are pretty easy to deal with, and do not merit major concern unless you somehow get cornered by one. Next up, we have the infamous Slider. It has a base health of 280 and deals 60 damage per attack. Sliders can be found starting at Kolkaz and going into Pechorsk Castle. Sliders are often seen as the scariest thing to encounter in the zone due to their teleportation-like movement. When spotted, Sliders will begin to teleport in short distance bursts toward its target. This can happen extremely fast and catch explorers off guard. Unlike previous entries, Sliders do pose a major threat and should be treated as a priority target once you notice them. And you always want to fight them on your terms, meaning you want to take a proactive approach, not a reactive one. Luring them to safe, open areas is ideal. Basically, you want room to back up if you need to and be out of immediate danger of other threats. This way you can calmly line up a headshot while slowly backing away. Weapons with a high damage per shot are ideal. Even the sawn-off shotgun can one-shot if you're using slugs or if most of the pellets land. You can engage them with melee combat, but I wouldn't recommend it for most people, as it's very risky and requires practice to pull off consistently. If you want to see how you can take them on with a knife, again, refer to my melee range video. Overall, while Sliders can be intimidating, as long as you have vigilant eyes and a cool head, they go down just as easy as everything else. Moving on to our last non-mimic entity, we have the girthy BTR. The BTR entity is based on the Russian BTR-70, an armored personnel carrier or APC that entered service in 1972. It was the successor to the BTR-60 and the predecessor to the BTR-80, all of which resemble one another very closely. It is fully amphibious and armed with the KPVT machine gun chambered in 14.5 by 114 millimeters. Just for reference, this is what that looks like next to a 50 BMG. The BTR is still being used by much of Eastern Europe, Russia, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. In-game, it has a base health of 90 million, making it functionally indestructible. Yes, it technically can be killed, but it's extremely difficult and costly for basically no reward. Fortunately for us, the BTR's gun vastly underperforms compared to its real-life counterpart, dealing 20 to 25 damage per shot, with a fire rate of 300 rounds per minute, firing in 3-round bursts. The BTR can only be seen in Kolkaz Zarya, patrolling a static route around the map. Its engine is audible from a long distance, so it's pretty easy to keep track of. Overall, as long as you stay out of its way, it shouldn't be an issue. Now we look at the mimics. While they are most certainly not all made equal, there are some general rules to follow to maximize your success while fighting them. Rule number 1, always engage from some kind of cover. The less your body is exposed, the less likely you are to be shot. So make sure you always have something to stand behind and conceal yourself with. Trees can work, but aren't recommended, as you can be flanked from multiple sides very easily. Also, when you start taking fire, instead of immediately shooting back, seek the nearest cover instead, although that can be situation dependent. Rule number 2, have a plan for retreat. When faced with a large group of entities, make sure that you have an avenue of escape in mind for when you get overwhelmed or just need to reload your mags. Avoid retreating into open fields or forests if you can help it. For example, let's say I get pushed back out of the back gate of the Kolkhoz train yard. Instead of running into the forest, I'm probably going to run to the east, hugging the wall. Not only can I use the wall corner as cover, but I can also use these pipes. There's also a clear shot to run into Balaki as well, in case things go further south from there. This example is just to highlight the potential factors to consider when choosing how to remove yourself from a bad situation when necessary. Rule number 3, always keep your health topped off. You never know when that little sliver of health may mean the difference between life and death in a gunfight, especially in close quarters. Keeping regens on you is essential for this. Rule number 4, always fight mimics at your maximum comfortable range whenever you can. Simply put, the farther you are, the harder it is to hit you. Sniping is a powerful tool, and if you're a good enough shot, you can kill them before they even have the ability to retaliate. So if you're not such a great shot, I would recommend hitting the range for some practice. Rule number 5, always check your corners and move through unfamiliar or high-risk areas slowly. An unseen mimic with an automatic weapon is, in my opinion, the most dangerous thing in the zone, and something you definitely don't want to run into with your pants down. With those out of the way, let's move on to our first entry, the Police Mimic. It has a base health of 40 and wields a Makarov, dealing 22 damage per shot. The armored variant has a base health of 100 and deals 25 damage per shot. They can be found all over the zone. While all mimics shoot at you, they do have different behaviors setting them apart. Police mimics, I'd say, are the simplest of the bunch. When spotting an explorer, they will begin to engage and either move closer or farther depending on their current distance from the target. They seem to prefer a distance of around 20 to 30 meters, although that is just talking from experience. When they need to reload, they will often start sprinting to cover. Police mimics are relatively easy to deal with. Their slow rate of fire and small magazine makes the threat they pose rather minimal. You can even kill them with knives at low risk if they're isolated. Just zigzag toward them or bait out a reload. Overall, unless they're being supported by other entities, they pose little risk to explorers. That being said, it's still best practice to avoid getting shot. Next up, we have the Mimic Hunter. It has a base health of 110 and wields a sawed-off shotgun, dealing 60 damage if all pellets land. The armored variant has 180 health and does the same damage as the standard. They can be found starting in Balaki. Hunters are very aggressive. If spotted at long range, they will begin sprinting towards the target. They usually move in hard-to-read patterns, so shooting them before they can get to you can be challenging, especially with a low-capacity weapon. Once they get within a few meters of a target, they will crouch down and shoot both of their shells. This can be particularly lethal to any explorers without cover and without armor. However, they are very predictable, and like with the Police Mimic, they are easy to deal with, especially while isolated. Let them come to you, and then as they crouch to fire, slip behind cover. More often than not, they will waste both shots and have to reload, at which point they are easy pickings. Just bear in mind that you may have to chase them down if they run for cover. Overall, as long as you maintain good cover, you should be able to take them down with ease. Moving on, we have the Mimic Commando. It has a base health of 90 and wields an MP5 submachine gun, dealing 8 damage per shot. The armored variant has 135 health and deals 12 damage per shot. They can be found starting in Balaki, specifically around the construction site area. Something to note about all mimics wielding automatic weapons is their rate of fire changes depending on the distance from the target. At close range, they will almost always mag dump on you. This is incredibly dangerous even for armored explorers. At medium range, they will do short bursts in quick succession, and at long range, they will do short bursts more periodically. So it's imperative to use cover and don't peek for too long at close range. The Commando has a tendency to be rather passive in my experience. It's common for them to stay in one place, even if they know where you are. This often results in unexpected ambushes after a firefight takes place. Overall, while these guys are definitely lower on the danger scale compared to some others, they are still to be taken seriously and dispatched as quickly as possible. Next up, we have the Mimic Scout. It has a base health of 120 and wields an AKS-74U, dealing 20 damage per shot. The armored variant has a base health of 154 and also deals 20 damage per shot. They can be found starting in Pobeda. These guys are a step up from Commando Mimics, dealing a lot more damage per shot. As far as special behaviors go, it feels like they behave similarly to the Commando Mimics. Overall, like with many of the later Mimic variants, these guys are close-range powerhouses, so use caution when in close quarters. Moving on, we have the Mimic Marksman, but everyone calls them snipers, so we're going to keep calling them snipers. It has a base health of 105 and wields an SVD dealing 45 damage per shot. The armored variant has 150 health and deals the same 45 damage per shot. They can be found starting in Pobeda. Snipers are unique among their peers, being able to spot and engage explorers from long distance relatively accurately. They are almost always found on rooftops and in watchtowers, making them relatively easy to spot. However, occasionally they do spawn on the ground, mostly in the castle or as a result of a terminal given mission. When they do, they exhibit some unique behaviors. They prefer to engage at long distance and will back away if you get even remotely close to them. I've also seen them hide in bushes, almost deliberately it seems. This can make them very hard to spot and can even conceal their muzzle flash when they do fire. Like I said though, this occurrence is pretty uncommon, but seeing them do this kind of stuff is pretty cool. Overall though, while they are something to be wary of, their predictable placement makes them much less threatening than they otherwise would be. Just engage them from cover and they should be an easy kill. Next up, we have the Mimic Gunner. It has a base health of 160 and wields an AKM, dealing 20 damage per shot. The armored variant has a base health of 189 and deals 25 damage per shot. They can be found starting in Pobeda, most commonly around the Kolkhoz checkpoint. They behave similarly to the Scout Mimic and the Commando Mimic. These guys are pretty scary to come up against, especially the armored variant. 25 damage per shot in full auto can put you down really fast, so it's best to minimize your exposure to one once you're aware of its presence. Do quick peeks from around cover and don't stay in its sights for more than a couple seconds at a time. Overall, they should be a priority target due to how dangerous they can potentially be, just like our last entry. Finally, we have the Mimic SWAT. It has a base health of 200 and wields an AS Val dealing 20 damage per shot. The armored variant has a base health of 220 and deals 22 damage per shot. They can be found starting in Kolkhoz, specifically around the train yard and greenhouse area. Their high health and damage makes them a particularly dangerous foe to face. Like with the AKM Mimic, when fighting them, try to use cover and limit your exposure to them for only a few seconds at a time. Also, check for these guys in corners if you're going to the castle. They seem to specialize in sitting in the dark, waiting for an unexpected explorer to pass by and absolutely eviscerate them. Overall, this is probably the Mimic that I fear the most. Give these guys no quarter, because they will certainly give none to you. One last thing before we wrap up. These behaviors aren't completely set in stone. I've seen the AI do very unpredictable things outside of their usual patterns of behavior, so it's always best to be prepared for some shenanigans. I also tried to document how mimics in particular try to work together. However, during testing, only one of two things would ever happen. Either they would all rush forward as a group immediately, or only one or two of them would move in, while the rest would stay in their current position. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up. Into the Radius has a nice diverse set of threats for you to experience as you navigate this hellscape. I hope you learned a thing or two here on how to combat them. Until next time, explorers.